The call that crushed a Titan drama and revenge alert. Before you dive into this story about how a real estate magnate's betrayal crashed headfirst into a patriarch's fury, we need a favor. Smash that like button on this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling the most powerful stories. The magnate's fall. He was Marcus Sterling, an industry titan, a man who dictated rulings in boardrooms and built corporate empires. She was Audrey Vance, his elegant wife, the perfect ornament for his immaculate life. But behind the closed doors of their marble mansion in the Hamptons, the perfection had rotted into a cruel lie. And in one terrible, explosive moment, with his mistress as a witness, the mask didn't just slip, it was violently torn off. He raised his hand against the woman he had sworn to protect, a single act he believed would silence her forever. He was dead wrong, radically wrong. He never imagined that the call she would make in her darkest hour would unleash the total collapse of his world. Because Audrey's father wasn't just a father. He was a force of nature, an inescapable reckoning. The cracks in the marble, the silence in the Sterling mansion was a living entity. It seeped from the cold marble floors, clung to the heavy silk drapes, and pooled in the cavernous spaces between Marcus and Audrey Sterling. Their home, and sprawling testament to modern wealth in the heart of East Hampton, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully curated museum of a life that once was. Marcus Sterling was a man sculpted by ambition and arrogance. His public image was spotless, a charismatic real estate mogul lauded in magazines for his Midas touch. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. To the outside world, he and Audrey were the golden couple, his success seamlessly paired with her restrained elegance, inherited from a family of old money prominence. But inside, the gold was peeling, revealing the cheap metal beneath. Tonight, the silence was particularly deafening. They had just returned from a Metropolitan Museum of Art gala, an event where Marcus had been the star, accepting an award with a speech extolling community, family, and integrity. He had even thanked his beautiful, supportive wife, Audrey, squeezing her hand on stage as camera flashes exploded. The gesture felt as cold and rehearsed as everything else he did. Now, he stood by the window overlooking the glittering city lights, a glass of expensive scotch in hand. He hadn't addressed her since the car door closed. Audrey sat on the edge of a velvet divan, her silver dress shimmering in the dim light. She hadn't changed out of it yet, a subconscious act of defiance, as if removing the costume meant accepting the grim reality of their evening. "You were quiet tonight," Marcus said. His voice was flat, not a question, nor a concern. It was an accusation. "I was tired," Audrey replied. Her own voice was barely a whisper. "It was a long night." He turned, pinning his sharp blue eyes on her. "You looked bored. Mrs. Harrington commented that you seemed distracted. It's embarrassing, Audrey. When you are with me, you reflect me. I need you to be present." The words were like tiny shards of glass. It wasn't about her feelings, her exhaustion, or her state of mind. It was about her performance. She was an asset, and apparently her performance review was in. "I apologize," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I will do better next time." This had become their script, his critique, her apology. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of her spirit. She remembered a time when his eyes conveyed warmth, when his touch was a source of comfort, not the prelude to a demand. They had met in college. He was the driven scholarship student with fire in his belly, and she, the daughter of Senator Robert Bob Harrison, a man who had built his own empire from the ground up, not in finance, but in political influence and ethical government contracting. Her father had seen that same fire in Marcus and had mentored him, providing the initial capital and connections to start his first development firm. Marcus never looked back and seemed to have forgotten who had opened the first door for him. Lately, the distance between them had become a chasm. There were the late nights he claimed were for closing deals, the weekend business trips that never showed up on his official calendar. There was the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his jacket one night, which he'd dismissed by calling her paranoid and hysterical. There were the whispered calls he took on the balcony, his back to her, in a low, intimate voice she no longer recognized. Her heart knew the truth, though her mind was terrified to confront it. She rose. The rustle of her dress was the only sound in the room. "I'm going up to bed, Marcus." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, not even bothering to look at her. "Fine. I have some work to finish anyway." Work. The word was a flimsy shield for his lies. As she walked toward the grand staircase, her phone, resting on a side table, vibrated. A message notification lit up the screen. It was from a friend, and it contained a single photo. It was a screenshot of someone's social media story posted less than an hour ago. The photo showed a crowded, trendy bar in Soho. In a secluded booth, a man, mostly from the back, was leaned in close to a woman with vibrant red hair. The man wore the same bespoke, dark gray Tom Ford suit Marcus was wearing now. His hand, bearing the distinctive gold signet ring she had given him on their 5th anniversary, rested possessively on the woman's arm. Audrey gasped. Her blood ran cold. It was no longer just suspicion. It was proof. A digital photograph, a careless moment captured and shared, had just confirmed the total demolition of her marriage. She looked from the phone in her trembling hand to the man standing by the window, a silhouette of lies against the city lights. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening scream of his betrayal, and she knew with a certainty that both terrified and empowered her that that silence was about to be broken. The mistress and the master plan, Cara Mendoza, believed in taking what she wanted. She saw life as one big competition, and she had no intention of settling for the silver medal. When she met Marcus Sterling at a real estate convention 6 months ago, she identified him not as a married man, but as an opportunity. A powerful, handsome, obscenely wealthy man, clearly starved for the kind of adoration his porcelain doll wife could not, or would not, provide. Their affair had not been a slow burn. It had been an explosion. Cara was everything Audrey was not. She was loud where Audrey was quiet, bold where Audrey was reserved, and relentlessly ambitious. She showered Marcus with the effusive praise and physical attention he craved, feeding his ego until he was completely addicted to her. "She doesn't understand you, baby," Cara would whisper, tracing Marcus's jawline as they lay in the rumpled sheets of a 5-star hotel. "Does she appreciate the money? Sure. But does she appreciate the man, the predator, the genius who builds skylines?" Marcus would lap it up, his eyes closing as he absorbed her validation. "No," he'd admit, his voice thick with self-pity. "She doesn't. She's old money. She doesn't understand the struggle, the hunger." It was a narrative they had built together, one that painted Marcus as the misunderstood hero and Audrey as the cold, ungrateful princess in her ivory tower. It absolved them both of all guilt. Cara was a sharp young real estate agent at a rival firm, and she was smart. She knew playing the long game was key. She never pressured him. She never gave him ultimatums. Instead, she made their time together an escape, an exciting, passionate fantasy world where he was king. She was the perfect mistress, patient and compliant, all while subtly weaving her future into his. She would accidentally leave a designer scarf in his car, a tube of her specific lipstick in his briefcase. She wanted to plant seeds of her existence in the sterile, Audrey-controlled world. Tonight, While Marcus was at the gala, Kara had been consumed by jealousy. She had scrolled through the online photos of the event, her lips curling at the sight of Audrey in her shimmering gown, clinging to Marcus's arm. That should be me, she thought, a familiar venom rising in her throat. And it will be. So she sent him a text, a simple, provocative one. Thinking of you on that stage, handsome. The real prize is waiting for you downtown. Club V in Soho, don't keep me waiting too long. She knew it was a risk, that he was supposed to go home to his wife. But she also knew Marcus. The thrill of the forbidden, the ego boost of having two beautiful women vying for him. He couldn't resist. And she was right. Less than an hour after the gala ended, he had texted back, "On my way. Give me 30 minutes." He arrived at Club V smelling of expensive cologne and power. His tie was loosened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He'd spun a quick lie to Audrey, something about meeting a potential investor for a drink. A lie that slipped out with practiced ease. "To us," Kara said, clinking her champagne flute against his whiskey glass in their isolated booth. Her red dress was a stark, burning contrast to Audrey's glacial silver, and to a future where you don't have to sneak around to be with the woman who truly worships you. Marcus's smile was strained. "Soon, Kara. The time has to be right. There are complications, financial entanglements." This was his standard line. He spoke of his marriage as if it were a complex merger he was trying to dissolve. Kara had learned to feign patience, but internally, she was growing tired of the excuses. Her friend, Skylar, had taken the photo of them and put it on her private story. A small thrill for Kara, a way to feel more real. She felt a surge of victory, knowing their image was out there, linked with his. Their conversation was a dance of ego and seduction. He complained about Audrey's moodiness, her lack of passion, her distraction at the gala. Kara listened, sympathized, and offered the perfect antidote, her undivided, adoring attention. "She's lucky to have you, and doesn't even know it," Kara said, her voice dropping to a husky whisper as she ran a manicured nail across his arm. "But I do. I see you, Marcus." He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a possessive, hungry kiss that was more about ownership than affection. It was in that exact moment, his hand on her arm, her face tilted to his, the distinctive glint of his signet ring visible, that Skylar's photo was taken. A single, careless click that would become a digital hand grenade about to be lobbed into the pristine, silent halls of the Sterling mansion. Unaware of the impending detonation, Marcus pulled away from the kiss, a smirk on his face. "Let's get out of here," he murmured, tossing a wad of cash onto the table. He felt powerful, desired, and in complete control of his two separate lives. He had no idea the carefully constructed walls between those lives were about to be pulverized. Please pause and share. Have you ever seen a social media post reveal a truth that changed everything? Tell us about it in the comments. The violent truth. Audrey stood at the top of the staircase for what felt like an eternity. The phone clutched in her hand, the image on the screen burned into her retinas. Every nerve in her body screamed. The muffled sounds of Marcus moving in his study downstairs, the clink of his glass being set down, the soft thud of a drawer closing. They were a countdown to a confrontation she could no longer avoid. For years she had swallowed her suspicions, accepted his flimsy excuses, and told herself she was being irrational. She had allowed him to convince her that the cracks in their marriage were products of her imagination. But there was no ambiguity in this photograph. The suit, the ring, the intimate posture. It was him. It was real. A cold, hard fury, one she hadn't felt in years, began to displace the shock. It started as a low hum in her chest, growing into a roaring inferno. It was the rage of 1,000 small betrayals, 1,000 lonely nights, 1,000 condescending remarks. It was the fury of a woman finally pushed past her breaking point. She descended the stairs, her movements deliberate, the soft sound of her slippered feet on the marble the only noise. She entered his study without knocking. He was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, scrolling through his phone, a look of smug contentment on his face. He probably thought she was safely tucked into bed like an obedient wife. He looked up, his expression instantly hardening with annoyance. "What is it, Audrey? I told you I have work to do." She didn't say a word. She simply walked up to his desk and placed her phone on the polished wood, the screen still glowing with the image of him and the redhead. She slid it across the surface until it stopped directly in front of him. Marcus's eyes flickered. For a split second, a flash of pure, adulterated panic crossed his face. His carefully controlled mask slipped. He saw the ring, the suit, the unmistakable red hair of Kara. He clenched his jaw, but as quickly as the panic came, it went, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Cornered, like a trapped animal, he chose to strike. "What is this?" he growled, pushing the phone back at her. "Are you spying on me now? Going through my things? Having your little friend stalk me? Don't you dare turn this back on me." Audrey's voice was low, but it vibrated with a dangerous intensity he had never heard before. "Who is she, Marcus?" He stood up, slamming his hand onto the desk. The sound echoed in the silent house. "Her name is Kara, if you must know. And she is a woman who appreciates me, a woman who is vibrant and alive, not a cold, boring statue who walks through life like it's an obligation." The cruelty of the words was stunning. He wasn't just admitting the affair, he was using it as a weapon, turning his betrayal into her failure. "An obligation." Audrey's laugh was brittle, devoid of humor. "My life with you has become an obligation, Marcus. Waiting for you, covering for you, pretending for you. I have upheld my end of this marriage with dignity while you have been sneaking around, lying to my face and spending our money on her. Our money," he sneered, stepping towards her. "This is my money. I built this. You just live in it. You came into this with a last name, Audrey. That's it. A last name I've made even more powerful. My father gave you your start," she countered, tears of rage and pain welling up in her eyes. "And I've paid him back 100 times over," he yelled, his face contorted with rage. "I owe him nothing, and I certainly owe you nothing. This marriage has been a dead weight around my neck for years." Suddenly, the front door opened. Audrey and Marcus froze, turning to see Kara Mendoza herself walking in. She held Marcus's briefcase, which he had apparently forgotten in his car. A triumphant feline smirk was on her face. "Marcus, darling, you forgot this," she purred, her eyes flicking dismissively over Audrey. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" The audacity was staggering. She hadn't just been a secret. She was here, in their home, a physical manifestation of Marcus's deceit. Marcus's panic was gone, replaced by brazen arrogance. Having Kara there seemed to embolden him, as if her presence validated his choice. He put a hand on Kara's arm, pulling her slightly behind him, in a protective gesture. He was choosing his side. Audrey looked at the two of them, a tableau of her humiliation. "Get her out of my house." Her voice was trembling but firm. Marcus laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Our house, Audrey, and Kara is my guest. Maybe it's time you face reality. It's over. I want you gone." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. He wanted her to leave the home she had decorated, the life she had endured, all the years of sacrifice, of biting her tongue, of hoping things would get better. It all came down to this, being thrown out of her own home in front of his mistress. Something inside her snapped. "No! Her voice rose. "She will leave. This is my house, and you will not disrespect me in it." She took a step towards Kara, her eyes blazing. "Get out!" Before she could take another step, Marcus moved. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like claws. "Don't you dare talk to her like that," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Let go of me, Marcus!" she screamed, twisting her arm free, and then it happened. In a flash of uncontrolled rage, with his mistress watching with wide, triumphant eyes, Marcus raised his other hand and struck Audrey across the face. The slap was a sickeningly sharp crack, echoing through the cavernous foyer. Audrey stumbled backward, her head snapping to the side, a bright, searing pain exploding across her cheek. The shock was so profound, it stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the total violation. The brutal, final confirmation that the man she had once loved was gone, replaced by this monster. She brought a trembling hand to her cheek, her wide eyes fixed on him, filled with horror and disbelief. In that moment, the entire world seemed to fade, leaving only the deafening silence, the throbbing pain, and the chilling realization that she was in a room with a man who was no longer just her husband, but her enemy. Crucial interacting point. After witnessing such an act, do you believe Audrey should have immediately confronted him with more rage? Or was it wiser to walk away in silence as she did? Leave your opinion in the comments before the story takes a turn no one expects. The inescapable reckoning time seemed to warp and stretch in the moments following the slap. The buzzing in Audrey's ears was louder than the small, smug gasp that escaped Kara's lips. Marcus stood before her, his chest heaving, his own shock slowly dawning as he looked at his hand, then back at the red mark blooming on his wife's face. For a split second, a flicker of something, regret, fear, crossed his features. But it was quickly extinguished by a doubling down of his anger. "See what you made me do?" he spat, the classic abuser's excuse. "You pushed me to this. You drove me to this." Audrey did not reply. She couldn't. Her mind was a maelstrom of searing pain and icy clarity. The fog of her marriage, the years of doubt, hope, and denial, had been violently slapped away. She saw Marcus exactly for what he was, a weak, cruel man hiding behind a facade of power. She saw Kara not as a rival, but as a pathetic scavenger, content to pick over the scraps of a rotten marriage. And most importantly, she saw herself, not as a victim, but as a survivor about to make a choice. "Pack your things," Marcus ordered, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "I want you out. Tonight." Kara stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Marcus's back. "Marcus, darling, calm down," she cooed, though her eyes danced with victory. She looked at Audrey with undisguised contempt. "You heard him. Get out." Audrey's gaze rose from the floor and met Kara's. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only a chilling emptiness that seemed to unsettle the other woman. Without a word, Audrey turned and walked, not toward her bedroom to pack, but toward the small library at the end of the hall. Her movements were steady, almost robotic. "Where do you think you're going? You'll pack a bag," he shouted. She ignored him. She closed the heavy oak doors of the library behind her, the solid click of the latch providing a thin but necessary barrier. Her legs finally gave way, and she sank onto the Persian rug, her body shaking uncontrollably. The tears came then, hot and silent, streaming trails through the makeup on her face, stinging the tender skin of her cheek. She wept not for the loss of her husband, but for the loss of herself, for the woman she had been before she started shrinking to fit his massive ego. She cried for the years she had wasted believing a lie. The crying lasted only a few minutes, then the rage returned, clearer and more focused than before. He had laid hands on her. He had brought his mistress into her home. He had told her to leave. This wasn't just an ending. It was a declaration of war. And he had no idea she was not unarmed. Her trembling hand reached for her phone. Her contact list was a who's who of the city's elite, but she scrolled past them all. There was only one person she could call, one person who had told her for years that Marcus was a shark who would one day bite the hand that fed him. One person whose love for her was unconditional, and whose wrath, once provoked, was legendary. She pressed the contact name, Dad. It rang twice before he answered. Audrey, it's late. Is everything all right? Senator Harrison's voice was deep and calming, the voice of a man accustomed to control. He was semi-retired now, but for 40 years, he had been a titan of ethical contracting and political strategy. A man who built things to last, from skyscrapers to relationships. He was a man of integrity and iron will. The moment she heard his voice, a sob broke from her lips. Dad! She choked out the word, barely audible. The calm in his voice vanished, replaced by razor-sharp steel. What is it? What happened? Are you hurt? Marcus, she started, but the words caught in her throat. Talk to me, Elle. What did he do? She took a shaky breath, the dam of her composure breaking completely. He's cheating on me, Dad. He brought her here, to our house, and he hit me. The last two words were a ghost of a whisper, a confession of a shame she never thought she'd have to bear. Silence. Cold. Across the line, Robert Harrison was processing the unthinkable. His daughter. His only child. The person he cherished most. She had been harmed. Audrey could almost feel the temperature drop through the phone. Where is he now? Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. In the foyer. With her. And you? Are you safe? I'm in the library. I locked the door. Good child. You stay there. You do not open that door for anyone but me. Do you understand? Yes, Dad. I have 2 more questions, Audrey. And I need you to be honest. Is this the first time he has laid hands on you? She hesitated. There had been other times. An arm gripped too tightly. A door slammed in her face. Being cornered during an argument. But a slap? The first time he struck me. Yes. All right, Robert said, the single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. Second question. Do you want to remain married to him? The question was a lifeline. It wasn't what do we do, or how do we fix this? It was what do you want? No, Audrey said, the word coming out with a strength that surprised her. I don't. Then you won't be, Robert stated. Not as a hope, but as a fact. I'm on my way, but I'm making another call first. Stay on the line with me until you hear the sirens. Sirens? Audrey asked. Her mind numb. He assaulted you, Elle. That is a crime, Robert said, his voice a low growl of protective fury. And Marcus Sterling is about to learn the hard way that the Harrisons do not tolerate criminals. The hammer drops. In the foyer, the atmosphere was thick with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and triumph. Marcus was pacing, his initial rage giving way to an edgy, restless energy. Kara watched him, a perfectly painted picture of concern, though internally, she was ecstatic. This was it, the final, dramatic breakup. She had won. I can't believe she had the nerve to speak to you like that, Kara said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. After everything you give her, she's lost her mind, locking herself in the library like a child. What does she think she's going to achieve? Let her sulk, Marcus grumbled, running a hand through his hair, messing it up for the first time all evening. He was annoyed that Audrey had locked herself away, denying him the satisfaction of seeing her pack her Chanel bags in defeat. This is for the best, darling. It was going to happen sooner or later. Now, we can finally be together properly. Kara sidled up to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her head on his chest. Marcus looked at her. His anger softened slightly as he took in her adoring gaze. This was what he wanted, unquestioning admiration. He had been so focused on the confrontation with Audrey that he hadn't fully considered the consequences. Divorce. It would be messy. Audrey's father. He would be a problem. But Robert Harrison was old now, semi-retired. What could he really do? Marcus held all the cards. He was Marcus Sterling. He was untouchable. "You're right," he said, confidence returning. He cradled Kara's face in his hands. "No more hiding. Tomorrow, I'll have my attorney, Stephen Price, draw up the papers. We'll offer her a generous settlement to go quietly." "And if she doesn't go quietly?" Kara asked, a hint of steel in her voice. A cruel smile touched Marcus's lips. "Then we'll remind her that a public, messy divorce will damage the Harrisons' spotless last name far more than it will damage mine. Her father will want to avoid a scandal. He'll take the deal." He felt a surge of power. He had faced down his wife, established his dominance, and was now planning the cleanup. He pictured his new life with Kara. Vibrant, exciting, free of the stifling judgment he felt from Audrey and her family. He led Kara into the living room, pouring them both a celebratory drink from the crystal decanter at the bar. "To new beginnings," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "I'll drink to that," Kara said, her eyes sparkling. She took a sip. Then she looked around the cavernous room. "It's a beautiful house, a little cold perhaps, needs a woman's touch." "My touch," Marcus chuckled. "It's yours, all of it." They settled onto the sofa. Kara nestled against him, mapping out their future. They would travel. They would host parties. Real parties, not the boring charity galas Audrey preferred. She would finally have the life she deserved, with the partner she deserved. The faint nagging thought of the red mark on Audrey's face was pushed deep down, buried under layers of self-justification and excitement over his newfound freedom. Meanwhile, locked in the library, Audrey wasn't listening to the muffled sounds of their celebration, but to the steady, reassuring voice of her father on the other end of the phone. He didn't press her for details. He simply talked to her about her childhood, her mother, a funny anecdote from a family vacation years ago. He was anchoring her, pulling her back from the brink of shock and despair. He was reminding her who she was, not just Marcus Sterling's wife, but Robert Harrison's daughter. "They're 2 blocks away, Elle," Robert said quietly, his tone snapping back to business. "I'm right behind them. When you hear the doorbell, I want you to stay put until I come for you. Understood?" "Understood," Audrey whispered. Then she heard it. A distant sound that steadily grew closer. A piercing, high-pitched wail. Sirens. In the living room, Marcus and Kara heard it too. Marcus frowned, standing up and walking to the window. "What the hell? Probably a false alarm at the Garcia's place. The old man probably forgot the code again." He turned away from the window, dismissing it, but the sirens didn't fade. They grew louder, closer, culminating in an abrupt silence, right outside their home. Then the night was split open by flashing red and blue lights, painting strobing patterns on the living room walls and reflecting in the crystal glasses in their hands. Marcus stared, his mouth suddenly dry. Kara sat up, her celebratory mood evaporating into confusion and alarm. "Marcus, what is going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Before he could answer, a loud, authoritative pound from a police fist resonated on the front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a demand. Marcus's heart began to hammer against his ribs. This couldn't be happening. It made no sense. He glanced from the flashing lights outside to the locked library door, and for the first time that night, a seed of genuine, deep-seated fear began to sprout in the pit of his stomach. He was a man who was always in control. And suddenly, terrifyingly, he was losing it. The knocking came again, louder, this time more insistent. Thump, thump, thump. It was a sound that did not belong in the serene, orderly world Marcus had so carefully constructed. "Marcus, who is it?" Kara whispered, her face pale. "We should ignore it." "Don't be an idiot," Marcus snapped, his fear manifesting as anger. He strode to the front door, smoothing his jacket and forcing a look of calm authority onto his face. He was Marcus Sterling. This was his house. It was probably a mistake, a misunderstanding he would clear up in a moment. He pulled open the massive, ornate door, ready to issue a sharp reprimand for the disturbance, but the words died in his throat. Standing on the threshold were two uniformed police officers. Their faces were grim, their stances professional and unyielding. The flashing lights of their squad car bathed them, creating an eerie, surreal scene. And standing just behind them, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, was Senator Robert Harrison. He was not the gentle, semi-retired old man Marcus had pictured in his mind. He was the man who had built a construction empire through sheer guile and intimidation, a man whose quiet demeanor concealed a core of tempered steel. He looked at Marcus not as a son-in-law, but as something foul he had found on the sole of his shoe. Marcus's mind raced. "Robert," he stammered, his bravado crumbling to dust. "What? What is this? What's going on?" Robert did not speak to him. He simply nodded to the officer on the right, a tall, stern-faced man, whose badge read Sergeant Miller. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his eyes locked on Marcus. "Are you Marcus Sterling?" "Yes, I am. But there must be some kind of mistake, officer." "We received a call reporting a domestic battery at this address," Miller said, his voice an official, dispassionate monotone. "We need to enter to secure the victim's safety." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Victim?" He glanced sideways at Robert, whose expression remained unmoving, his silence more damning than any accusation. "Battery? That's absurd. My wife and I had a disagreement, that's all. She's overly emotional," Marcus blustered, trying to regain control. "There's no need for police involvement. This is a private family matter. When one party strikes another, it ceases to be a private matter and becomes a criminal one, Mr. Sterling," Miller stated flatly. He stepped past, forcing Marcus to back up into his own foyer. The second officer followed, his hand resting near his sidearm. Kara, who had been watching from the living room entrance, let out a small, terrified squeal. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. This wasn't the glamorous new life she had envisioned. This was ugly. This was serious. "Where is Mrs. Sterling?" Sergeant Miller demanded, his gaze sweeping the foyer. From the end of the hall, the latch of the library door clicked open. The door swung inward, and Audrey stepped out. She stood framed into the doorway, her face pale, but her expression resolute. The red, swollen mark on her cheek was starkly visible under the bright foyer lights. Seeing it made the air still. It was undeniable proof. Sergeant Miller's professional demeanor hardened into one of clear duty. Robert Harrison's eyes softened briefly with pain as he looked at his daughter, before refocusing on Marcus with renewed glacial hatred. "Audrey," Marcus began, his voice pleading. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them you're fine." Audrey's gaze met his. There was no love, no fear, no pity. There was nothing. She was looking at a stranger. She then looked past him, toward her father. Robert finally moved. He walked past the officers. He walked past a stunned Marcus, and he went straight to his daughter. He gently took her face in his hands, his thumb brushing near the ugly bruise. "I'm here, Elle," he said quietly. "It's over." He wrapped her in a protective embrace and guided her away from the scene, toward the front door. Sergeant Miller turned his full attention to Marcus. "Mr. Sterling, based on the visible evidence of injury and the victim's testimony, you are under arrest for domestic battery." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Arrest? You can't be serious. You don't know who I am." "I know you're a man who allegedly struck his wife," Miller countered. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The panic, pure and absolute, took hold of Marcus. This wasn't happening. The neighbors, the media, his business partners, his entire life was built on a reputation of power and control. A photo of him in handcuffs would shatter it. "This is because of him!" Marcus shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Robert, who was now standing with Audrey on the porch. "He's using his influence. This is illegal!" The second officer stepped forward. "Sir, you need to calm down and cooperate." But Marcus was beyond reason. He took a step back, shaking his head wildly. "No! Get out of my house!" That was his final mistake. The officers moved with swift, practiced efficiency. They grabbed his arms, spun him around, and forced his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs closing around his wrists was the loudest sound Marcus had ever heard. It was the sound of his world ending. As they led him, stumbling and protesting, out of his own front door, he saw the faces of his neighbors, drawn to the commotion, their expressions a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. He saw Audrey standing next to her father, her face unreadable as she watched his total humiliation. And he saw Kara, still frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of horror as she realized she had hitched her star to a blazing, falling wreck. The power, the prestige, the carefully crafted illusion, it all vanished under the cold, unforgiving glare of the police lights. He was no longer a titan. He was just a criminal in a ridiculously expensive suit, being forced into the back of a squad car. Thank you for subscribing. The final heartbreaking twist is next. The final stroke. The cold, leather-like seat of the police car felt like a block of ice against Marcus's skin. The door slammed shut, a sound of absolute finality that sealed him within the cramped, sterile space. Through the bars of the window, he watched his perfect life crumble in real time. He saw Robert Harrison gently guiding Audrey into a sleek black sedan, parked behind the police car. She got in without a single glance back. His mind was a frantic mess. He was trying to calculate, to strategize, to find a way out, but his thoughts were slippery, refusing to cohere. "Lawyers, I need Stephen Price. One call. I get one call. I can fix this. I can sue them for wrongful arrest. I'll ruin that cop Miller." His frenzied internal monologue was interrupted by a sudden, crushing pressure in his chest. It felt like a concrete block had been dropped on him. His breathing became ragged and shallow. A strange tingling sensation spread down his left arm, and the flashing lights outside seemed to blur and distort, smearing into senseless red and blue streaks. "I can't breathe," he managed to choke out, his voice a suffocated gasp. The officer in the passenger seat turned. His expression of annoyance shifted to alarm as he saw the state Marcus was in. Marcus's face was slick with sweat, his skin an appalling ashen color. His eyes were wide with terror. "Sergeant, I think he's having a panic attack or something," the officer said. Sergeant Miller looked back. "Dear God, a heart attack. Damn it! Call this in. We need an ambulance." Marcus's world was shrinking to a pinprick. The humiliation, the sudden, total loss of control, the terrifying realization of Robert Harrison's true power. It was all a massive, systemic shock his body couldn't handle. He wasn't just losing his wife or his freedom for the night. He understood in that moment that he was losing everything. His business, Sterling Developments, was built on a foundation of loans and credit lines, all underwritten by banks where Robert Harrison sat on the board or had deep connections. The multi-million-dollar contracts he had just secured for a new downtown skyscraper were with consortiums that included Robert's old friends. His entire empire, which he so arrogantly claimed to have built himself, was held up by the very man he had just made his mortal enemy. He hadn't just slapped Audrey, he had slapped the entire Harrison legacy. And the backlash wasn't a legal battle, it was annihilation. This realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. The pressure in his chest intensified, becoming a ripping, unbearable pain. His vision tunneled. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the cold, unyielding face of Robert Harrison watching him from the street as paramedics rushed toward the squad car. Then, Marcus Sterling, the untouchable titan, slumped unconscious against the window of the patrol car. Epilogue. The rebirth of the heiress. Marcus didn't die. He woke up in a hospital bed handcuffed to the rail, with a police officer stationed outside his door. He had suffered a massive, stress-induced cardiac event, but the physical recovery was the least of his problems. The moment he was discharged, he was processed and charged. The story was everywhere. Real estate mogul Marcus Sterling arrested for domestic battery. The press, who had once fawned over him, turned on him with rabid ferocity. Photos of the flashing lights outside his mansion were on every news site. His carefully curated image was irrevocably shattered. Audrey, represented by the most formidable divorce attorney in the state, a personal friend of her father, filed for divorce the next day, citing irreconcilable differences and cruelty. The prenuptial agreement they had signed was rendered void due to a betrayal clause Marcus had overlooked, and a domestic violence conviction would cause any judge to rule overwhelmingly in Audrey's favor. The financial collapse was swift and brutal. Just as Marcus feared, Robert Harrison made a few quiet calls. Credit lines were pulled. Investors backed out. The Sterling Developments Board, under immense pressure, called an emergency meeting and voted to remove him as CEO. His assets were frozen, pending the divorce settlement. Within a month, the empire he thought he'd built was being dismantled and sold for parts. Cara Mendoza vanished. Faced with public scandal and realizing that Marcus was no longer a vehicle for ascent, but a one-way trip to social and financial ruin, she disappeared. She stopped answering his calls, changed her number, and was rumored to have moved to another state to start over. Her name, forever tainted by its association with his fall. Audrey never spoke to Marcus again. She reclaimed her maiden name, Vance. With her father's support, she went back to college to finish the architecture degree she had abandoned to be a supportive wife. She sold the cold, silent mansion and moved into a bright, airy apartment in the city. The bruises on her face faded, but the strength she discovered in her darkest hour remained. She founded a small, non-profit organization dedicated to helping domestic abuse survivors find legal and financial resources, using her name and story not as a source of shame, but as a beacon of hope for others. Marcus Sterling, stripped of his wealth, his company, his wife, and his reputation, became a ghost. He took a plea deal to avoid a protracted public trial, receiving probation and mandatory anger management therapy. He was a broken man, a whispered warning at cocktail parties and boardrooms, a stark reminder that no matter how high you build your tower, it means nothing if it's constructed on a foundation of lies, cruelty, and a profound underestimation of the man whose daughter you betrayed. 2 years felt like a lifetime. In that time, the name Marcus Sterling had faded from the glossy pages of business magazines to a cautionary whisper. The man himself had faded further. The impeccable suits were replaced by ill-fitting department store clothes. The confident stride was now a hesitant shuffle. The cardiac event had diminished him physically, but it was the annihilation of his ego that had truly hollowed him out. After his probation ended, he was just another man adrift in a city he once claimed to own. Audrey Vance, however, had flourished. The silent, hesitant woman was gone, replaced by a leader whose calm and confidence were the foundation of her new life. The Vance Foundation for Domestic Recovery wasn't just a passion project. It was a force. Housed in a beautifully renovated downtown building, it was a sanctuary of hope and practical aid for women escaping situations she knew all too well. One autumn afternoon, Audrey was finalizing plans for their annual fundraising gala with her small, dedicated team. Laughter echoed in the bright, open office, a sound that had been absent from her life for so long. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Maria, buzzed her on the intercom. "Audrey, there's a gentleman here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. A Mr. Gomez." Audrey frowned. "I don't have a meeting with a Mr. Gomez. Did he say what it's about?" There was a pause, and Maria's voice lowered. "He's insistent. Says you know him." A cold premonition washed over Audrey. She had a policy against taking unscheduled meetings for safety reasons, but something in her gut told her to face this. "It's all right, Maria. Send him through." A moment later, Marcus Sterling walked into her office. The change was shocking. He was thinner, his hair flecked with gray at the temples, his face etched with the bitter lines of defeat. He looked at her, at the sleek, minimalist office, at the name Audrey Vance, founder and chairwoman, on the glass door. He saw a world that hadn't just moved on without him, but had flourished in his absence. "Hello, Audrey," he said. His voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. "Marcus," she replied, her own voice perfectly level. She didn't stand. She didn't offer him a seat. She simply waited, her hands folded on her desk, creating an impassable barrier between them. She felt no fear, not even anger, just a distant, clinical pity. "This is quite an impressive place you have here," he said, gesturing vaguely. "I saw your picture in a magazine. The philanthropist." There was a sneer in the last word, a ghost of his old arrogance. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her tone cutting through his attempt at small talk. He flinched. "I just wanted to see you. Talk. What your father did to me, Audrey, it was a complete annihilation. He didn't have to destroy me. We could have worked things out quietly." Audrey stared at him. Her silence was a powerful indictment. He was still spinning the same narrative. He was the victim, the wronged party. "You destroyed yourself, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but laced with iron. "You did it the moment you decided your pride was more important than my safety. You did it with every lie, and you sealed it when you raised your hand against me in my own home." He had the decency to look away, ashamed. "I know, I'm not that man anymore. I've been through therapy, anger management. I've thought about what I did every day." He took a hesitant step closer. "I just think, after everything we had, don't I deserve a second chance? Not with you. I know that's over. But in life, I can't even get a job interview. Your father has blacklisted me everywhere." "My father protected his daughter and his family's interests," Audrey corrected him. "The consequences of your actions are yours. They do not belong to him, and they certainly no longer belong to me." A desperate, ugly light entered his eyes. "So that's it? You're just going to sit there on your throne built with your daddy's money and watch me drown?" Audrey finally stood, her movement fluid and strong. She walked around the desk and stood before him, unafraid. "This, you mean?" she said, sweeping her hand to indicate the bustling office beyond the glass. "It was built with my pain, my survival, and my determination, to ensure that what you did to me, other men don't get away with, doing it to women who don't have a powerful father to call. You are the architect of this foundation, Marcus. Your cruelty was its cornerstone." He stared at her, speechless. He had come here expecting a glimpse of the old Audrey, a woman he could manipulate or guilt. He found a stranger made of steel and fire. He saw in her eyes that he had no power, not even the power to hurt her anymore. He was nothing. An echo in a hallway she no longer walked down. "You should leave," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. He looked at her one last time, searching for something, anything, to latch onto. He found nothing. Defeated, he turned and walked out of her office, past the curious eyes of her staff, and out of her life forever. Audrey watched him go. Then she turned her back to the door. Her gaze settled on the city skyline outside her window, a future she was building for herself, brick by brick. And so, Marcus Sterling's gilded world didn't just crumble. It was annihilated by the consequences of a single violent act. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true strength is not found in dominance or control, but in the courage to stand up and say, "No more." Audrey found her voice in the silence after the slap, and with a single phone call, she reclaimed not just her safety, but her entire life. Her journey from silent partner to fierce survivor proves that the end of a chapter, however painful, can be the beginning of a story of incredible strength and purpose. What did you think of Audrey's final interaction with Marcus? Did he get the justice he deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of silent power and ultimate redemption moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic real-life narratives.